So they removed the physical home button on the Galaxy S8, right? That wasn't too hard. They just put the buttons on the display, gave them a little fresh look. Now it's rumored that the iPhone 8 is going to be removing the physical home button as well, if you can call it that, given it doesn't actually click. Realistically, it just gives you the illusion of a click. Apple's now moving their home button onto the display, right? So that's practically the same thing. No, it isn't. I'm here to talk to you about why the home button on the iPhone 8 is going to work very differently than it would on a Android phone. See, Androids have had on-screen home buttons for years. They've had lots of different nav buttons too, multitasking, back buttons, or search, but Apple has put quite a lot of potential into their single button at the bottom of the phone. That's been their fingerprint reader, of course, your home button, their multitasking button, your Siri button, as well as reachability, and I just think that button overall does a lot more for the iPhone than an ordinary home button does for any other Android phone. And see, something I noticed when I had the Galaxy S8 is that as soon as you just touch or tap in any way the home button, it's activated. That's just like pressing a regular home button. But you see, on the iPhone's home button, you can rest your finger on it and nothing can happen. However, there's a big difference here. Like, there are different commands with this home button, as in, if you double tap on the iPhone's home button, you activate reachability. And if you double click, you activate multitasking. And something I realized about that multitasking feature, as in, when you double click on that home button to activate all the different apps you're running, your finger stays on that home button the whole time. You don't lift your finger twice, typically. Most people just go down to the bottom and go click, click. Their finger stays on top of the home button the whole time, and the only thing that's varying is the pressure you're applying to it. You see, if we tried to implement these kinds of features on a Galaxy S8 or the Google Pixel, you'd be activating the Google Assistant, because that's what holding down the home button does. And see, when you apply pressure on the iPhone 7's home button, you activate Siri, which means I think that on the next generation iPhone, the on-screen home button will be able to just sit there, and even when you just rest your finger on it, it will not activate. As in, applying the same amount of pressure you use to just open an app on the home button, it won't activate it. In order to get that clicking motion out of the iPhone 8's home button, I think you'll have to apply that extra bit of force that you would have had to apply on our regular iPhone 7s. That way we can still have features like reachability, so that there's a keen difference between double tapping the home button and double clicking it. And you'll have to push hard to activate Siri via the home button. And a lot of people like to unlock their phone and read their notifications on their lock screen, but they just keep their finger there, and that's one of the great things about the fingerprint reader. Now, of course, it seems more doubtful every day that we'll even have a fingerprint reader underneath the display of the iPhone 8, but if that is the case, and they were able to replicate it just how it works on an iPhone previously made that has the physical stuff, people like to just unlock the phone and then keep reading through their notifications, and then they press the home button when they're ready to open it. So to replicate this iOS home button feel on an on-display home button, it's going to work a little bit differently than you'd think. But I think this is going to be a learning curve for everyone, because Android has had on-display buttons before, but Apple really hasn't done this home button thing yet. What really is going to happen to that nav bar at the bottom? This really is a wild card that I don't think a lot of people are anticipating. We're just kind of taking for granted, oh yeah, home button's on the bottom. But Apple's iPhones are the only one that register different levels of pressure. And I think they're going to incorporate that when they redesign the home button on the iPhone. It's not going to be some last minute throw-in feature. This also makes me very curious for the 10.5-inch iPad coming later in the year. Potentially as early as next month, but those odds are pretty slim. But at some point this year, it's rumored that an iPad with a 10.5-inch display is rumored to not have a home button. But Apple hasn't put taptic engines in an iPad yet. So if they are moving the home button onto the display like I did in my concept, will they be able to replicate that click feeling? Because we all know you don't want to put a fingerprint reader on the back of the iPad, or really on the power button either. That's not any better. Perhaps that's why it's delayed. They couldn't figure out how to embed the fingerprint reader. So I'm very curious on how this new home button is going to work. I think it's going to look really cool. The A11 chip, as well as newly designed GPU components, are going to make the animations that go on in that nav bar probably look really slick. Like when you activate Siri, your home button turns into the Siri animation and stuff like that. Or when you open different apps from app to app, the color of the nav bar will change and perhaps have little buttons on the side so you can interact within that app. There's a lot we don't know, and I just think we're glossing over the fact that an on-display home button is going to work very differently than you'd assume. As in, a lot of people are going to get their iPhone 8, see that on-display home button, and then tap it, and nothing will happen. And then the screen will have to say, you know, press hard. You gotta click it, just like it's a regular button. But there's one thing I can guarantee. The taptic engines in the iPhones are the best of any phone. When you activate the home button on a Galaxy S8, there's a little bit of feedback, but it really doesn't feel natural because there's two thuds. There's like a boom boom, but it's not until after you've lifted your finger off the home button. Whereas on an iPhone, if you press and hold once, you feel one click, and then when you let go, you feel another. And Apple has really perfected that button feel, even though it's not actually moving. And I really hope they bring that over to the iPhone 8 so that even though there's not a physical home button on the phone, it's definitely gonna feel like it. It won't feel any different than the iPhone 7's, and it won't work any different. Meaning to activate home button, you'll have to click a little harder than just a regular, ordinary tap. But part of me is kind of lost on something. The iPhone 8 is supposed to be a smaller form factor. It's supposed to be the same size as a regular iPhone 7, but the display is supposed to be like 5.8 inches, so it's supposed to be a larger display. So would they have reachability so that you could reach further on the screen? Because the form factor's smaller, but the screen is bigger than an ordinary 7 Plus, so that... Maybe they won't have reachability, so maybe they'll start making the home button work differently than it already is. Oh man, that would be bizarre. I'm just very curious, and I can't wait to see what it's like when it comes out, but how do you think it'll work? Apple definitely has some major challenges with removing the physical home button that's on the chin, but I'm really excited to see how they conquer it. Let me know how you think it should work in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.